This year's battle for the prestigious Golden Demon Awards at Adepticon is over, and in this video we're going to look at the results. It's always exciting to see amazing artists create pieces in the Warhammer universe, and I hope you are as excited as me to see whether or not this year's edition can be anywhere close to the insane quality we had last year. After all, these top level painters had to sit at home for years during the pandemic preparing their entries. It will also be interesting to see how these new categories are going to affect the event and whether or not Games Workshop managed to take proper pictures this time. We'll try to answer all of these questions and just a few observations that I already made while browsing through the winners ones. There's lots of 3D printed terrain. There's no large teamwork entries due to the rules change. Non-metallic metal is king, baby. I don't think I saw more than 4 entries that won a trophy that were true metallics. We have a lot of new and slightly confusing categories like Necromunda, Blood Bowl, where completely different sizes and numbers of miniatures are competing against each other. And that for sure was interesting. Also, glazing is dead. We do live in the age of stipple blending. And another thing has been glaringly evident. Less traditional skills are going to play a larger role moving forward when competing for the Slayer Sword. This is not a feedback video because none of these people asked me for any feedback. Whenever I talk about strengths and weaknesses of the entries, it's purely to understand why they placed the way they did, why maybe one entry placed higher than the other. And that's about it. Enough waffling. Let's look at the first category. Don't forget that we do have chat with us, and if you want the real spicy takes, this is where you need to be looking at. And we'll start with a really spicy one, Warhammer 40k single. Let's look at third place with Kwan Ho Kim. They placed third with this non-metallic metal Hellbrecht. If we zoom out, there is a lot of great effects, the reflections in the gold armor and also reflections in the sword. And if we zoom in, this is kind of what I've been talking about. The stipple blending, or in this case, it is more a line blending almost, is really taking over. And again, I think it's because this can build contrast a lot faster than glazing can. More intense contrasts. No technique is dead. I mean, if you look through the winners, you will see that there is a lot of stipple blending and line blending, and almost no entries that were just trying to go for super smooth blending. In the context of Golden Demons, if that is what wins, then other people are going to paint like that too. It's creating a funnel into certain techniques. I feel like they did really well defining the shapes, so the volumetric light is really great, and that small effect here by the lantern. We'll come back to this when we looked at the others, and I'll give you my opinion why I think they quote-unquote only placed third. And this is what I mean. So a lot of bases had the standard rocks and sand. Personally, one thing that is the reason why I haven't entered into Golden Demons a lot lately is that I'm not super inspired when it comes to basing. And then I'm thinking, okay, let's just do rocks and sand. And I always feel like, nah, that's not gonna be enough to win a Golden Demon. But let's say 90% or even 95% of these entries went for exactly that type of basing. I don't know if that means if doing slightly more could be a way to impress judges a bit more. But one thing that gives me anxiety when planning out my Golden Demon entry, how much I have to invest into creating an interesting scene. Like if you look at Albert Moreto Font's Elf entry that has a built-in story that is telling with the scenery, that probably took just as much as converting the whole miniature or preparing the miniature. So keep that in mind. But I was blown away by the contrast again that they were able to achieve here. But again, I feel like some of these highlights are, you know, stipple blending, and you can see the texture. And again, it's not bad. It's just, I feel like one way where you could have a leg up. So for example, we can see the lines here. And then we have the winner. And this is what I mean. This is a base that took at least more time than probably this or this. And again, I'm not trying to drag any of those two down. I feel like that's an objective observation with the resin and the waterfall and the small stream flowing through the legs of the miniature. And the controversy with this one, and I don't know if I would have noticed, but I think the background is printed out. That's what the controversy so far has been. And I don't think there's anything against that in the rules. If it's a painting competition, you should maybe try to paint everything that is on the mini. So it's kind of surprising that this was what gave it a leg up, because, and again, it's judging from pictures, but I don't think the painting on the miniature is that much better than the other two. But again, what do I know? I haven't seen it in person, so maybe I'm completely wrong on that. The only point of criticism or opinion piece that I have is that if it's a painting competition, try to paint the background too. I don't think it would have dragged it down. Like if you saw brushstrokes and all of that, it never really drags it down. And then I think another point of critique here was that it is AI generated. I don't know about that. It doesn't really matter if you take something that is AI generated or a a picture that someone took or an artwork that someone else did. I feel like it should be a painting competition, and more or less everything kind of should be painted. That's my opinion, at least. I said I'd come back and talk about why I feel like this placed third and the other one second and so on. The execution of the armor is very on point, I'd say. There's a couple of areas where you have the traditional Games Workshop approach, for example, the muscles, the flesh parts that are very outlined, where that remind me of the old Katashan muscle parts that have this dark black outline, very heavy metal execution that is maybe not up to date anymore. That looks okay when it comes to creating contrast, but I feel like you could do something more interesting with other painting approaches here. But yeah, then there's a couple of areas, and I know that the way that Games Workshop takes pictures makes everything appear a tiny bit rougher, but so I feel like just putting edge highlights here, I know that there's some blending in there, but the black kind of looks a bit stale. Some kind of color in there just to have a bit of a different shade, just something that makes the black a bit more impressive. Yeah, so that's in my opinion something that might put it one step below this or maybe even the winner. With figures like this, I find that it's hard to distinguish between single miniature or diorama. Yeah, so one thing that they dropped, they allowed bigger bases. I'm not 100% sure. So I feel like in general that's a good thing, but it can lead to excessive things like these, where you, like I said, if you want to compete for the top spots, you have to build a diorama base for a single mini entry. And that feels a bit over the top for me. But I mean, this is what it is for these categories right now. The backdrop is AI generated printout. Yeah, so again, I'm not sure, does it really matter if it's AI generated? I get why AI is bad, but the question remains does it matter whether it's AI or not in this context, when it's a painting competition and not a printout competition. Decals are not banned, printed naming plates are not banned. I don't see where the problem is with the back. I don't know if there's a problem with it. There's definitely not, it's not illegal or anything. It's just part of the piece, right? You could enter something with a name tag that is hand drawn or no name tag at all. Like here, this has nothing, and it does not mess with the quality of the scene of the piece. But this improves the scene without much skill. So I feel like a painting competition should reward skill, and skill that you show over others, and printing out the scenery and integrating it into terrain. I personally don't feel like that's skill that puts you above someone else. But again, it's my opinion. We don't have to agree. I would love to see a more free and artistic approach to miniature painting in contests. So there is contests that has more free and artistic approaches. It's just that the Golden Demon competition has this more narrow set, first of all, of rules, and also how people choose to execute their minis, because they're known to discard on errors. So anything that looks like a blend that has been botched, that's an error. Or maybe if the consistency is not all the way, like we talked about, this part here that maybe was not up to par with all the metal work, or maybe the belt buckle, for example, looks a bit lower standard than the rest of the metal. So maybe they took a few of these things and said, yeah, that's an error. We found less errors here, so this is placing second and this is placing third. So that's generally the idea behind Golden Demons, or how Golden Demons work, and why we see less of an artistic interpretation in Golden Demons. Okay, so third place in Warhammer 40k unit or Killteam. Damn. Again, we do have the obligatory rocks and sand, but the minis are really nice again. Again, we have a lot of line work. You can see brushstrokes where the contrast is built up, large contrasts in the gold, for example, so really striking paint job. But then you have a couple of areas where I feel like they didn't have an idea that worked. So maybe they had light coming from a certain angle that casts a bit of a shadow, but some areas just don't look executed to perfection like the gold parts and the blue parts have been. So again, since Games Workshop is kind of discarding on what they see as mistakes, I feel like some areas were maybe not as refined as the others. But overall, obviously, very striking contrasts and very pleasing color combinations with the yellow and the blue. And the blue going from very dark to a satisfying highlight color. IKEA Army, I see what you did there. I feel like this is supposed to be an epic heroic diorama, but the sharp angle from the top does work against it. Yeah, I see what you mean. Maybe like this one had a bit more of a refined execution. Hard to tell in the pictures. Well, I think we do have true metallics here with some lens sentry. Again, we do have stones, rocks, debris, and earth. The kind of the theme for the basis on this one. So the contrast is nice too, obviously, but it's really hard to tell whether or not this one is more neatly executed. I feel like the scenery gives this a 1-up. And I feel like the blues are super well executed. Looks really satisfying. And here we have the more volumetric highlighting that we talked about earlier. All the individual shapes are still a bit blocked in, so you have a large contrast, but they look a bit more volumetric. And at least in my opinion, that's always a bit more pleasing than just the blocky approach that you take when you're going for a more heavy metal style. Yeah, really cool unit. And then the winning entry probably had a leg up because of the execution. So the execution looks really neat. We do have a lot of these line highlight patterns, and we don't have that much contrast on, for example, the white, but I feel like the black makes up for it. So the very pleasing black parts, I feel like the black parts carry this more or less. And then they didn't go for something super experimental on the white or the red, for example. So the red on the banner has a very deep shadow and some nice highlights, but for example, the other reds are more or less tame, and the yellow, for example, also relatively tame. And that way you can execute your highlights very neatly and everything looks crisp. I love the banner. I'm a sucker for banners. Me too. So I think this one is free-handed. I'm not sure about this one, so there's some sculpted parts, but yeah, I enjoy free-handed banners too. But yeah, composition, colors, so the tone, the warmth, or the temperature of the black really works in this composition. Really pleasing. Okay, let's move on. Warhammer 40k large miniature or vehicle. And this is one of the categories. Do you have any ideas why any Warlords piece didn't place? Looked incredible. Yeah, I heard about that. I don't know. I only have seen I think it was this one, right? So I can only talk from pictures. The execution obviously looks super crisp. The question is, was it crisper than this? And that I can say. On picture, it looks super crisp. So if they ranked, if they placed, you would probably not be able to say it, or you would not be confused or surprised, right? They look amazing. I can't speak to whether or not they were better or worse than any of the others, especially because the white has a lot of reflections in there. So I'm 100% sure they were amazing. Why they didn't place? A Golden Demon is always a lottery. Don't forget about that. Sometimes the others win, and sometimes you lose. But yeah, that I don't have any guesses why. It would be pretentious, because that's the only picture I saw, and I think he posted it like the day before the event or 2 days before the event. That I think they changed, and now large, miniature, and vehicle are all in one category, and I'm just asking myself why, and the answer is marketing. That way they do have room for a lot more categories like Necromunda and all of that being introduced. It is what it is, but I find it so hard to compare a tank to something like this. Why don't you have vehicles against vehicles and then large minis against large minis? But okay, we kind of accept when we enter into Golden Demon that these are the rules that Games Workshop makes, and this is the boundaries we are going to work in and do our best and try to win a trophy. So this is the 3rd place, a Nurgle drone. Interesting pattern. I feel like that looks really, really cool. So they placed highlights on the large surfaces or the large areas, highlights and shadows, obviously. Oh, we do have true metallic metal here. And then they added like these dot patterns. It would be cool to see maybe a bigger picture how refined that looked. So there's always a bit of a gamble adding non-traditional texture to your surfaces, because it could elevate the piece or it could drag it down, simply because you have to make sure that you do it consistently over all of the areas, so over the whole miniature. The freehand looks a tiny bit out of place, maybe. The freehand looks a bit wonky compared to the amazing texture on the surfaces. Yeah, that's what I mean, right? It feels a bit more cartoonish. I guess it's just a choice of patterns. So this mask thing here, and then a grenade, or what looks like a grenade, and then a skull. I feel like if that was more just straight up patterns, it could have worked a bit better. I can't really point the finger at why this irks me a bit. The green looks like a Granny Smith apple. Okay, let's move on to 2nd place. So one thing that jumped out at me, I feel like that tank driver is really well painted. The contrast of the face stands out a lot, and the black is subtle. It has a green reflection, or, you know, green OSL from this part, so that makes the black stand out a bit more. And then it's a very scale modelers approach to painting a tank. Rocks and earth again. Tank driver needs to hop out and wash this tank. Isn't there a washing simulator game? But yeah, I mean, honestly, I can't say much here. I dig the weathering. It's very solid, but it's not like, it doesn't blow me away, let's put it that way. I'm missing that oomph a bit, but very solid paint job. And I like the painted miniature up here. If you placed a scale model builder into that category, I feel like it should have automatically placed at least 2nd place. It always looks better to me when the artist doesn't use standard basing parts like grass tufts, because it kind of breaks the illusion. I don't think there's anything wrong with grass tufts. Like, for example, Andy Wardle is really good at making these tufts believable. It's how, yeah, he paints them and how they integrate with the rest of the base. Night Shift should do a Games Workshop tank next year. Yeah, I agree. So that would be really interesting to see. And then we have Vashtor. And again, we do have epic basing bits. So congratulations, epic basing on your 2nd demon. So these look really cool, right? And I like what they did. They look a bit more like copper or brass, you know, bubbled up from the ground and then cooled off. So I found the skin very interesting. I wish I could see this up close and what they did, because it looks like they did a pattern. It's kind of weird. It's because on the photos, it looks like it would drag it down, but then I'm 100% sure in reality that pattern just looks really nice. And I like how kind of the pattern continues from the scales or from the plates. It's a very similar pattern. And I also like the composition, so the more muted skin tones, and then the brass gold metal. And I'm not 100% sure. I'm assuming it is non-metallic metal. I guess I would have liked maybe this effect here, or to have a bit of an effect here where there's light coming from within here. That would have maybe increased the aura effect a bit, and maybe the eyes standing out a bit more. That could have been cool. But this is very solid composition wise, and also as far as execution goes. Really nice contrast, especially up here. I like the contrast going from really dark brown to really, really bright yellowish tones. I think that's deserved. The driver's too clean for the 30 tank. I mean, he's inside, right? Most of the time. The dead tree in the back looks very real from the tank. Oh yeah, it does. It's probably a real tree, or you know, parts of a real tree, like with the bark. Or maybe it's 3D printed. Epic basing, question mark?
Me discussing others' paintwork. Just release videos, mate.
Just do them videos. Okay, Warhammer Age of Sigmar single miniature. Yeah, 3rd place, Andy Wardle. I feel like he painted that more as an exercise, and then he took it because he had something ready. The interesting thing about this one, I feel like, are the highlights, where there's more of a purple tone, which looks interesting against the dark skin. Yeah, so really like that from a color choice perspective. Everything was kind of stippled and line patterned, and there's a lot of weathering here, but it all looks interesting and looks cool. Yeah, again, if you look at more closely, we do have a lot of patterns, a lot of line work, but it's very consistent across all of the entry, I feel like. And then some nice blood effects. I'm not 100% sure about the placement of the highlights here. But it's difficult, right? So that's a very complicated shape. So how do you make that look interesting? You know, every single element and then have it drawn together by that huge highlight. I would have expected that to run a bit more parallel to this. But yeah, maybe it's just the angle. Maybe this gets wider towards the lower part. But yeah, just overall volumetric placement of highlights looks interesting, and all the color choice too. So it's not just a boring gray. It looks like a grayish skin tones. Yeah, also a bit more effort with the base. Not 100% sure this pond here, does it add anything to the storytelling? I feel like some of these ponds are almost like OSL that you would want to put on every mini just because you can do it. But yeah, I mean, texture looks nice. Again, this whole competition looks a bit like Texture Fest, and I guess that's what you have to do in the US with these judges. That's what they're trying to see. So the winning entry looks to me a bit like, you know, David Soper or the Skink maybe from last year or the year before. So again, it's that texture stipple blending that has kind of become trademark for, yeah, Golden Demon entries. But I like the more muted gold, with some parts where, you know, from below you have that orangish tint that breaks the monotony still a bit. So it's kind of like that when I talked about black parts on the Black Templars. You still have the gold that's very uniform, but on some parts it just breaks the color monotony, and that looks really cool. Yeah, very solid, very straightforward. Again, a lot of the texture is kind of the same, whether it's skin, whether it's metal. I'm not a huge fan of that, but again, this is kind of the way that people paint for Golden Demons. Reminds me of that one Slayer Sword winner. Yeah, exactly, that one. Man, I wish my clothes were that smooth and clean when I wash them. See, I mean, not everything needs to be realistic. If you have an interesting style, or if you have a conscious style choice, that can be interesting. And if we only painted realistic or miniatures, that would be boring. So I feel like having more stylized colors, more comic style, more illustration style colors with some entries, I just like the variety, and I like when painters surprise me with even a new style that works. Again, clean, very stylized execution in the tradition of past winners, like even Andy Wardle. It's not as refined as Andy Wardle's winner from, I think, last year. So this one here, that just has the contrast and the smoothness. And I feel like this one, again, without having seen it in person, but you know, some parts just look a bit less refined than others. Base lacks a bit, in my opinion. So there, it looks like this is a slab of clay where they pressed a tool into, and simply because there's weird soft lines in this, like where you have this part that is plastic, and even the skulls that have very sharp lines. So these additional parts, I can almost tell that they placed this and then maybe, yeah, this part where the skulls are, and then the rest is sculpted. You can kind of see the transition where they did that themselves. For example, if you compare this to Albert Moreto Font's piece, where every single detail on the miniature base is refined, yeah, there's just room for improvement there. So Age of Sigmar unit or a Warcry Warband. Third place, some dude called Jon Ninjas. Never heard of the guy before. I talked a bit about that in private with John. First of all, kudos to Epic Basing. That's another Golden Demon in the bag. But again, it's stones and earth. And while I get it, personally, I always get anxiety just thinking about only entering a base with stone and earth and tufts. I feel like, again, for a lot of these entries, that would have been a way to stand out even more, just storytelling-wise and so on. Again, there's nothing against it per se, but especially in this competition, that would have made every single entry that did it stand out. Yeah, the things I like most about this one was especially the axe, having this very dark, dull area of the blade, and then the actual edge being very bright. Again, a lot of stipple blending, line blending. I like the choice of, you know, making the edge highlighting or edge highlights bleed into the areas with a bit wear and tear. Overall, very solid. Again, it's a picture by Games Workshop. Some metal parts, for example, here, this one, could have maybe benefited from a bit more, you know, deep shades, deep in the context of everything else being rather high contrast, non-metallic metal. A YouTuber placed. 2 YouTubers placed. One of them even won gold. Get on that level, Mr. Jon Ninjas. What would be some ideas for decent bases with no rocks or skills for ideas? Yeah, so like I said, I'm always getting anxious because I don't necessarily have those ideas. But if you look at some past winners, my go-to winner is Albert Moreta Font. Has this knack for building, even if he does rocks and sand, he does them in a unique way. So I would try to do that. Like, again, I'm not dissing John here, but you know, if you went for some kind of different architecture, maybe they're fighting in a desert, just placing them in some foreign terrain. Just an idea, right? Again, look up Albert Moreta Font. He always comes up with nice ideas, be it original designs or using existing ideas and making them unique. But yeah, congratulations again. What are you going to do like next year? Are you going to enter again, or is that it? Mission accomplished. I assume if I get a demon, I wouldn't think about gold demon at all for 3 months, but now I'm already excited to find the next piece. Yeah, I get that. You're seeing all of these entries, talking to people about how they painted theirs, and getting new ideas from seeing other people's entries is always invigorating. Okay, second place, Nicolas. He has a very, again, the style of stipple blending and creating textures, and I feel like he perfected the placement of light with that technique so much, because he always goes from very bright to rather dark, so a lot of good contrast in there. At the same time, intense colors, say a lot of sicklish color tones. I also like the base. It's a very thematic base, and again, it's something different. Maybe that helped it stand out even more. But yeah, he always has a very Golden Demon suitable style, and the first place. So I wonder if a lot of the color transitions, or you know, you have a lot of green here, and then you have purple tones and more turquoise stuff on the other side, and I feel like this one has a leg up with light placement and the general feeling of, you know, light hitting the top, and then as we move down, and only these parts that stand out have more warm tones on them, almost like light hitting through leaves, and only very small amounts of light hit the bottom down here. And overall, just the scene again is something different. It would be interesting to see whether or not the execution was really super solid all over the place, because for example, here it becomes really, really artsy. I mean, obviously I'm talking from the pictures. I feel like the transitions here are rougher than in the other pieces. That's my gripe with it. I really like the colors, the intensity and everything that's going on, but I feel like the execution maybe is not the same as the others or better as the others. So which one is going to be valued higher? Like the more artistic interpretation or the execution? The piece is busy. I get it, but I mean, it's a bunch of reptiles stalking through the jungle, right? So you kind of expect it to be busy. Can you talk about the axe in number 2? The axe in number 2. So I'm not sure what you're trying to get at, but I kind of feel like, so something that's always tricky is weathered non-metallic metal. I feel like he has found a relatively good way. So he tried to sneak in a bit of a main highlight here, and then those are the darker parts, and the darker parts are a bit more weathered than the bright parts, which is always tricky. If you put like orange on white or next to white, it can look off really quickly. If you want to go for a really weathered axe, I feel like you have to fiddle around a bit and break some conventions. especially if it's non-metallic metal. Such clean Nurgle. I mean, again, it's a style choice. It's what David Soper did all the time, and he won just about everything for years in the UK with his Nurgle style. Yeah, I feel like the traditional Nurgle where you just poured all kinds of rust and snot and, I don't know, black goo and all of that on would probably not do as well in a competition that is about trying to show that you can paint really meticulously to stand out from the rest of the crowd. Yeah, so I kind of hope that it makes sense now why, again, I'm not dissing this, but I'm just pointing out that doing something that stands out from the rest with your base is probably a good idea to do. Golden Demon is just gamba. Yeah, it's rolling the dice. Sometimes more than other times. May not know, but the center model on the Seraphim piece is the Astrolith Bearer. The Seraphim community jokes. It broke and they put the frog on top. Yeah, I don't know. I think that was on purpose, but it's a funny joke nonetheless. So let's move on to Warhammer Age of Sigmar Large Miniature or Warmachine, another one of these categories that have everything mixed together. So the bases are a bit more unique here. So this part looked really cool, and I kind of get the idea behind this. She's regrowing the plants around her, exactly. So that's kind of the magic where we have some lush grass growing forward and around her. So I feel like that's a really good take on the idea behind the character. So let's start with number 3. Yeah, so the other two I feel like have a bit more of a technical execution, at least the winner has. So I feel like the winner is standing out quite a bit from the other two. Yeah, so a bit of a notch up from the technique from what it looks like. Yeah, still cool texture. Again, a lot of textured approach on the bones. Bit more of a straightforward blending on these and also on the cloth parts. Yeah, so again, good contrast in the metallics, but I feel the execution lacks a bit. So for example here, these parts, it could be the overexposure by Games Workshop, but yeah, it looks like there's some rougher transitions and maybe less of a definitive placement, so less intent behind where some color elements are placed. So I would kind of expect the purple to bleed over into the gray a bit longer, for example. We have seen some cleaner highlights on black parts in other minis. But yeah, I mean, cool paint job, but I feel like its third place is probably warranted against the other twos. Yeah, there's a lot of color intricacies in this one and how the light interacts. You can really get a warm feeling from this area up here, and then you have the bug that looks like it's a metallic bug. Yeah, I think those are very kind of deserved places in that order. Games Workshop needs to post more pictures. Yeah, as always, close-ups at least. But if they just took like a day longer to work on this and gave us more pictures, but we have this discussion every year. Yeah, it's Games Workshop Day. I don't think they will change, unfortunately. Anyway, Warhammer Underworlds, Warband. Yeah, so kind of interesting because we have a more traditional approach compared to what everyone else seems to be doing, where it's basically a diorama, but I guess it's just the way that this category evolved now. Yeah, so the base is more or less unique, but if you compare this to how Nicolas, for example, did these spikes, they look a lot more interesting. So maybe that could have been an idea to try and do something a bit more unique with these. But yeah, very earthen tones. Copper, non-metallic metal blends in with the rest of these tones. Yeah, solid, but for example, I'm not sure this would have placed in the last year. Like some of that texture work where there's not a lot of blending. Let's see what the others did. Yeah, so a bit more of a traditional, smooth painting approach. So we do see less texture here. Maybe it's the photos, but this feels a bit more like the more classic blending styles that you would see like maybe 5 years ago. Again, very solid, very painterly. I'm guessing the bases come like these. They worked with the shapes, you know, placing dark parts next to bright parts. Yeah, again, very solid. The gripe that I have with these a bit is that they look like we have black element placed against turquoise elements, placed against brown elements on the shield, and then red element. Do you see what I mean? It feels like all these shapes are individually treated and kind of missing something that draws it all together. But yeah, very solid placement of contrast, like dark parts against bright parts. It's more subtle. Also the non-metallic parts. For example, we just have one bright highlight here, very effective, and the rest being really dark. Yeah, definitely a cool unit. It's just I'm kind of lacking with all three of these. Something that hits me over the head with creativity. It's refreshing to see winners that are also playable. I get it, right? So this is an interesting way to display your minis. You can play with the elevation. Both have interesting ways to present the minis. This can look very pleasing. It does have really smooth transitions and really kind of a solid placement, but there's not much risk within them, right? You could argue that this is a muted armor because it has been exposed and so on, pushed further. Yeah, exactly. It does have a unique color palette for sure. So the choice to go with turquoise for the armor, like full turquoise, not only verdigris, is for sure interesting. What would allow the third place Underworlds to be in that category and not the diorama? You could perfectly well enter this into diorama. It's just a way you are more free to play with your base composition. I don't know, I don't necessarily find it a bad thing. I think it's cool that you can have ideas and work your warband into your terrain a bit. There's arguments against it and arguments for it. I'm not sure which one I prefer. Right, so Horus Heresy, another one of these categories that's gonna be tricky, and I expected a lot of Primarchs. We have Horus and Perturabo, so that's only 2 out of 3 with this more of a traditional paint job, I'd say, breaking the triad of 2 expected Primarchs. So they tried to do the classic OSL on the face. It's a more subtle approach, and I like it because, I mean, while I have seen a lot of really good versions that did the OSL really intense, I like this more muted approach. You can still see it on the hoses here, all of these parts. Yeah, on the cheekbones, and also it gives the eyes a bit more of a glow, which looks definitely interesting. And the eyes look interesting. I feel like you could almost lean a bit more into having like these veins or additional details. That would have looked cool, I think. But yeah, those are the things I like. Black, really solid. You know, here and there we have a couple of blown out highlights. So maybe that was a small thing that dragged it down against the other two. So then second place. Yeah, so I like the background, really simple. It's kind of simple, but it's effective. Like on first thought, I would say I would expect these drops to be more parallel, but then I feel like if you had wind blowing, that would be exactly the pattern that we would see. It would be interesting to know why this placed behind this one, what the rationale for the judges would be. And then Perturabo, I feel like it's a really solid non-metallic paint job. Tricky to judge from the pictures. So there's subtle hints of I guess this ground reflection. So that's a good or interesting small thing that you have the red reflecting there. Again, a lot of texture work. I'm not a fan of most of these dents, because when the white parts are of the same thickness as the dark parts, or very similar thickness, it kind of takes me out of the illusion. So I feel like this one here looks really good, but then, for example, this one, there's no thinning at the edge. So that's like the only criticism I would have for this one. Not sure how I feel about this. Obviously extremely well done, but also submitted in Golden Demon last year and got commended. Yeah, again, there's definitely a bit of a drop in standard, but it's to be expected compared against all the stuff that was there last year. It's built, yeah, so that's a nice little touch. Looks cool. Also looks a bit more old school, the way that you had servitor skulls in these old artworks. Next category, Warhammer The Old World. Yeah, so this was something that I wondered whether or not it's going to happen, because I feel like it's so ambiguous what you can enter in what category. So for example, this is clearly an Age of Sigmar miniature. I get that it's supposed to be the Green Knight, but where do we stop? It's just confusing. I'm not dissing any of the artists, right? So obviously he had an interesting idea to recreate the Green Knight with the new Seneschal model. Super nice conversion. I like it a lot. Yeah, so bit of a mixing and matching of tufts. The ground cover looks a bit more interesting, like almost like the stuff that Annie Wall does. Maybe a tiny bit less technically executed. But yeah, so I really like the idea. It's super hard to tell about the highlights. and how clean they are. This is really not a good picture. On this one, I really like the conversion. That's a really cool idea. Same goes for this one. So this one is, I think, an artwork of a very old codex. I think they nailed it. I think that base is also in the artwork with all the skeletons and all of that. So again, hard to tell on the technical execution, but I just really like these entries that try to pay homage to old artists that defined Games Workshop. Nicolas' entry is probably the best of those three as far as execution goes, but it's just his style. He has dialed it in, and obviously this is paying homage to the troll that won the Slayer sword a while ago. Large contrast going from very dark to very bright, and the subtle color changes, again stipple blending that allows to create these contrasts a bit more easily. Why does this, for example, qualify as the old world? Just because it's a troll? Chaos troll. Oh, it's a chaos troll. Okay. That's why it's old world. Okay. Silver should have won in this category. Yeah, that's the question, what you value. So if you value Warhammer-ness, I feel like I agree. If you value more like technical execution and contrast and all of that, then I think this is your winning entry. But I feel like it would have been nice either way. Again, judging from very poor photos. So this is the green stuff work. So a lot of green stuff over plastic parts. And then it's a head swap. I feel like it's a head bashed on one of these more fish-like trolls. So Middle Earth. Okay, third place. Cute little goblin. Okay, so that, I feel like it's not super special. It's always hard to make wood planks interesting. But yeah, I mean, there's not much to say. Very solid. Middle Earth category typically also always is all over the place, like hard to gauge what is going to win. But yeah, I feel like this one is a cool mini, but also doesn't have that much room to make it a wow factor. And then this stands out probably a bit more because of the intense colors and higher contrast, and it has metal parts. That's why you can make it pop a bit more. And then interesting by Marco Frizzoni, YouTube's very own, not just mecha, comes in with the usual more artsy style where there's a lot of subtle color transitions going on and really intriguing base. But yeah, I love the cracked ice effect where it almost looks like there's a stream of ice that he's running on. Yeah, lots of kind of the same color as an underpainting, probably not underpainting, but maybe underpainting. But yeah, shades, and then transitions more into these greener parts on the upper area. Really unique approach for sure. Sculpts for a lot of the rings are so much worse. Like, what even is that sword on the gold entry? Yeah, it's weird because back in the day, they were kind of good when they were metal still. And nowadays, it feels like they're giving the Lord of the Rings sculpts to the entry-level sculptors or the interns, where they used to be peri-twin sculpts, exactly, back in the good old days. Right, so the Blood Bowl category, another one of these categories, small figures, big figures, and squads. A very traditional paint job, so lots of edge highlights, really crisp, very subtle highlights on the black, for example. So everything here looks black. Then you have the edge highlights, and then just the subtle singular highlights on all of the elements. Very effective, very clean, very crisp, very heavy metal style. Always going to do good on a Golden Demon if it's executed really well, because it's hard to find errors on these. I feel like these other winners have been a bit more expressive. So for example, I like the contrast on the orange. Don't know about the execution, it's hard to tell, but it looks like they painted like hair on the arms and on the legs on some of these. So if that is executed really well, that is going to give it a leg up. And then we have Nicolas again. I feel like he won a lot of categories. Same style again, a bit less of stipple painting. And here he opted a bit more for lines to build these. Here I don't even see that much texture. So it looks like he tried to switch it up a bit, but he's just a master of these secondary reflections and building really intriguing renders of features. So he has these bright main reflections, builds some intriguing secondary lights, which just makes them look more alive. Yeah, even here. So this is a more subtle secondary light, but against something really dark, and then you have the main light. It's just really a style that fits Golden Demon really well. Let's move on to Necromunda. James Taro with 3rd place. This is always tricky to make work. Really bright yellow lights. It's not the preferred thing that I would do on a Golden Demon entry, because it's hard to make that look like light. And the rest is kind of solid green, kind of solid metal, kind of solid contrast and all of that. Yeah, it will be interesting to see how this category develops. People try to enter more the prestige categories like Age of Sigmar and Warhammer 40k, single mini squad and all of that. And then maybe not as many entries in these categories. All of these are super solid. If you compare them to the Age of Sigmar and 40k entries, though, they are there's maybe less time investment, a bit more shortcuts. But yeah, that's kind of the standard for the whole category. What I do like about these is the way that they highlighted the skin. So this is what I'm talking about. Those look a bit more Facetta-esque. Juxtaposition against these gaudy colors, like the really bright blue. So that's for sure interesting for this type of mini. It hits you in the face as far as colors go. Yeah, that's something that I really enjoy about this warband, especially. Yeah, the other entries, don't get me wrong, are solid. I just feel like those were categories that were a bit weaker. Yeah, epic scale. And I always like to see what people come up with. So especially with these curved backgrounds and playing with perspective. I'm guessing, or I'm kind of sure that this is the wrong angle. So if you look at it from the front, it's probably going to create an illusion. So this backdrop here is going to create an illusion. So that looks cool. It's kind of hard to tell the quality of painting. I thought about doing one of these. I guess that ship has sailed now, but you know, just this thing coming out of underground hangar, that's a really cool idea. Yeah, I always like the creativity that people put into these. And yeah, it's just these small vehicles, don't take a lot of room. You can build a lot of scenery around it. I like that about this scale. And then this solid execution, like straightforward mini painting, weathering techniques. It reminds me a lot of what Richard Gray used to do with these. I'm kind of guessing this one was technically a bit more well executed than these two, because I feel like those are always more creative ideas than this. But I guess it was cool that he has the solar auxiliary dudes standing around there. Creativity wise, I like these two a lot. These are not as impressive as last year because people have been touching grass more now that they aren't locked down anymore. Okay, Diorama Duel. Let's see, 3rd place. So again, this has a forced perspective again. James Taro always does these because, yeah, he's really good with these curved bases, and that was just a really neat idea. Again, I feel like if they need to take pictures from the front, I feel like, because, you know, the base getting wider in the front obviously creates the illusion. Games Workshop completely misses the point there. Van Cantor this time with an entry that is, I think, replicating the artwork. So the painting on this is a bit rougher, but obviously a very iconic scene, and it kind of lives and dies with the light effects. So very dark scene and very intriguing light effects. Hey Ben, you can repost them into those poses without basically chopping into 30 pieces. Wait, so did you repost them, or what did you do? Did you chop them into 30 pieces? Oh, 100% scratch build. Okay, that's quite the time investment, huh? So how long did the building take? Because I guess if the building already took hundreds of hours, then how much time did you have left for the painting? 250 hours sculpting, 300 hours painting. Oh, Jesus. How many of these hours did you enjoy? Let's say 30% of them. Okay, that's fair. Well, that's a good 180 hours, maybe. Spinning minigun effect is so nice. Yeah, I didn't even see that. Yeah, now that you mention it, that looks cool, yeah. It's so easy to miss these things just from these small pictures. The question is, if this was executed a bit more cleanly, could it have competed with this one? Because this is a very complicated scene, lots of minis, so it would have taken a lot more time to get really on point and clean, while this one here obviously is an amazing piece and took a lot of time to execute probably. So Alex told me that he started in October 22. That was when he first planned this entry. And obviously the effect is a lot better when you look at it with black background. And I jokingly told him that it's really brave to enter something where Games Workshop would have no idea how to photograph it for the winners page. I mean, it kind of even works on the white background, but obviously not as good as the black background. But yeah, it's a stunning piece just for the idea. Obviously creating that scene or that idea from the novel. And maybe there's room for improvement on the painting, but just the execution and how he had to like scan all of this and work on it in ZBrush and then put it all together. My tiny brain thought, yeah, he just bought 2 of them and then he placed them like opposite to each other. But of course you can't do that because you need it mirrored. That's a lot of time investment. And again, I said it initially, it feels like if you're competing for the Slayer sword, you need these out there ideas, these creative, never seen before approaches to your entry where you are really surprising people. And obviously this had to be done with digital means. So I mean, you could probably sculpt all of this, but it would have taken years longer. So doing it in digital and scanning this or taking, I don't know, 300 photos to be able to work on it digitally, it's just insane. I don't know if there's a lot of people that are willing to put in the time and the know-how and all of that. But yeah, that seems to be the new normal for if you want to compete for the Slayer sword. You have to plan a lot of these entries, and it gives me anxiety because you're putting in hundreds of hours of work before you even put paint on a mini. Absolutely insane work. You need mental illness and hyperfixation. Yeah, I mean, again, I don't have a hard time painting something for 200 hours. I just get immersed and just work step by step. But the upfront investment of planning and executing the base, I can't do that. I personally think while obviously the execution is neat, super nice, obviously the painting could be a tiny bit better, probably. I mean, again, I haven't seen it, but it's just that everything around it just is spectacular and never been seen. Yeah, well, this is probably also spectacular. People can figure this out a bit more, while the other entry is a bit more in your face. How did they do that and so on? That's maybe why. But yeah, I feel like this was a really strong category. Really, really good category. The Youngbloods last year was insane. I feel even the Youngbloods put hundreds of hours into their entries last year. So let's see, 3rd place here. I really, really like the contrast. So in the non-metallic metal, they tried to go from really dark to all the way bright. Same for the gold. Yeah, so I feel like a bit more consistency. Like, is there a dent here, right? Or is this a black dot on the edge? So just a tiny bit more consistency and you're good to go. Like focusing more on the edges, like this edge highlight here would separate the black a bit more from the red. A nice glowing effect. I know people that can't do it this well. Yeah. Sure. So just the next step needs to kind of be a bit more neatly. But the question is, how old are they, right? They need to be 12, technically. But I don't think they sent anyone away that was younger. But yeah, trying to go for a non-metallic metal. Some really cool highlights here. This looks relatively smooth already. Placement also is not too shabby. A bit of a marble effect already. Lots of things tried, right? So really, really cool entry. Okay, a bit less contrast in the gold, but the black is really well defined. Almost looks airbrushed. I couldn't hold an airbrush at this age. But yeah, again, maybe the gold a bit more definition, maybe a few more edge highlights, maybe going a bit brighter, maybe a bit more pure yellow, and then moving into ice yellow highlights. Yes, some inverted edge highlights could be something to really play with and make intriguing. Yeah, a bit more definition maybe, a bit more separation. The edges more contrast would separate all the parts a bit more. A freehand banner, really nice. Yeah, obviously, again, it's kind of the same thing with last year, just being so insane. It's super hard to be the next year in that category. But yeah, definitely on a good way. Okay, here's true metallics. Everything's kind of painted here, so we do see the beginning of like volumetric highlights. Some neat dark lining, not too bad. That's probably painted, right? So super steady hand. Yeah, cool. So there's some good separation here. That's something the other two didn't have. Maybe that has played a part. Yeah, I like it. It's still better than I can paint. We quickly switched into the encourage the talents of young folk. I mean, what else are you going to do? Like, can only encourage people, you know, the next generation. And if they're starting like this, then they're in a good way. Teacher's showing. Okay, so we do have one category left, the open competition. One thing that happened, obviously, is that Games Workshop updated the rules to not allow entries where you do teamwork anymore. So what happened in the past a lot is that people bought like these large scale sculpts for hundreds of dollars, and then they just had something that was very unique, no one else had, and then they just obviously did a great job painting them, but it already puts you ahead hundreds of hours if you don't have to also sculpt something. It's kind of unfair, I feel like, for people that do both sculpting and painting. So they made it against the rules, and I think maybe that's why we saw mainly single miniature entries in the open category. And again, maybe that's why we didn't see these giant dioramas or, you know, large scale models in the open competition. It's sad, but it is a reflection of what individual talent can do as opposed to teamwork. Seems fairer. Yeah, that's well put, I think. I just wonder why exactly did we see these three in the open competition? Like, in my opinion, that would be single mini. That would be single mini. I think I remember Richard Gray's piece being in the open competition in the UK too, but maybe I remember that wrong. I think there was a reason for that, but the other two, for example, are, my opinion, just single mini. Oh, I see Matt Kennedy is an employee, so okay. So he had to go in the open competition. I mean, it kind of makes sense, right? So he has that style that is prevalent at the company. Yeah, so obviously employees can only enter the open competition. But yeah, really nicely executed. So the green looks really lush, and the very heavy metal style, smooth transitions, like solid base with the tufts. Nothing super spectacular, but really fits with the more muted colors, the more muted heavy metal style. Just a solid piece, same as this one, obviously. And then Richard Gray's stuff is always great. Obviously, it's super neat. Again, we have a lot of stippling, which seems to be the theme of this Golden Demon. Maybe here the more heavy metal style gave this one a leg up. Okay, obviously, we already showed it or talked about it. Alex's diorama won the Slayer Sword. I think it's well deserved. The other pieces that were in the run, I feel like this one was my favorite in the competition as far as painting goes and as far as the atmosphere goes and the intricate patterns. It's just a really well-rounded entry. Then we also had this one in the run for the Slayer Sword, Age of Sigmar Single. This one, Age of Sigmar Squad. I feel like that one could have been a contender, but it's probably an acquired taste because it's a very unique style. This Warband obviously was in the race. Perturabo was in the race. The Troll, but I feel like even if it was painted 10 times better, I'm not saying that it could have been painted 10 times better. It's always tricky if there is something that is rather close to something that already won a Slayer Sword. So that other Troll that won the Slayer Sword a while ago is obviously really close to this one. You're not as likely to win it again with a very similar idea. And Alex's diorama again was just something new, something that has never really been done before. There was a diorama in 2011 by Matt Sexwish that you could turn. I don't know if that won the Slayer Sword, but that's placed really high, and that was super great with scenery that was ruined on one side and then intact and super lively on the other side, and you could turn it and it would play music. But yeah, what do you guys think? Do you think the Slayer Sword was deserved? What do you think the overall quality of this one was, especially compared to the last Golden Demon? Let me know. Oh yeah, so what is my favorite of the competition? I mean, again, Alex's piece is standing out a lot. It's one of my favorites. I really like the Vashtar simply because of the atmosphere. I do like all of the squads. I really like all of them, the 40k squads. I also liked the Xeros. Yeah, which is your pick? Yeah, it was great. I'm feeling expired, yeah, and also inspired to try my hand at Golden Demon again. Let's see if it works this time. I have about 200 days left, I think. So yeah, expired, XD. Have a good one.